example for that. Poland is a prominent example for that, and has hardly been reduced elsewhere, exonym use. Probably because exonyms are simply needed and because they are functional. This shows that the endonym-exonym divide has a remarkably political dimension, this shift in opinions, and is obviously a crucial concept. Paul Woodman, long-term British delegate to the UNGAGN sessions and United Nations conferences on the standardization of geographical names, has called it the Great Toponymic Divide. This is a book published by him as an editor on, this was the proceedings of a meeting of our working group on exonyms in Dansk in Poland, and we discussed at that event the endonym-exonym divide, and he called it the Great Toponymic Divide. I will try to substantiate this statement and highlight different approaches to this divide. So this will be my program. I will at first highlight the endonym-exonym divide as a crucial concept and try to find reasons for that, arguments for that. Then secondly, divergent, I will refer to divergent approaches to this divide. Third, definitions, and fourth, conclusion. So let me first turn to the first part, the endonym-exonym divide as a crucial concept. Place names can be regarded from various perspectives. We can regard them according to their meaning, what do they mean, according to etymology, to which language they belong, according to officiality, are they official or are they not official, and by standardization, are they standardized or not, have they a commemorative value or not, etc., etc. The aspect that leads to the distinction between endonym and exonym is the spatial relationship, the spatial relation between the human community using the name and the geographical feature denoted by it. So this is a geographical or also sociological aspect, a space-related aspect. It is, of course, just one of many aspects of place names, yet a crucial one, because it corresponds to two main human attitudes: to distinguishing between mine and yours, ours and theirs, and to territoriality, the desire to own a place expressed at all levels of human activity and community building. We all like to have our own flat or our own house. We like to have even our own room in our flat, perhaps, or at least a desk where we can store our own belongings and to which nobody else has the same access. At work, we like to have our own office room and perhaps also at least a desk of our own. And this goes up to other levels of human community building and up to nations, to countries that want to enforce their law and exercise their power on a well-defined territory. The endonym is it is a local community, the human group inhabiting a place or residing nearest to an uninhabited feature that has the endonym. So the group inhabiting the feature, if it is a populated place, or who is as a community which is nearest to this feature if it is an unpopulated place like a mountain or a lake or something. Marking a feature by an endonym means claiming possession of it, or at least responsibility for it. And this corresponds to the general meaning of naming as an expression of appropriation or assuming responsibility that is expressed, for instance, in Genesis, when it says, "So Adam gave names to all cattle, to the birds of the air, and to every beast of the field." If a community does not use the endonym, it has exonyms for places and features outside its own territory, to which it entertains frequent and close relations. They are usually created for names in frequent use by adapting the endonym or to the receiver language, to facilitate pronunciation, spelling, and memorizing. In many cases, exonyms are former endonyms of the receiver language due to later population exchange. For instance, the many German exonyms which exist for Polish places because of the population exchange after the Second World War, or there are older endonyms of the donor language exported to the receiver language when the feature became important for it. For instance, the English exonym Prague or the German exonym Prague for Prague has been derived from an older endonym version of Prague, so to say. Sometimes exonyms are transferred by mediator languages. For instance, many Scandinavian languages have names for Italian cities mediated by German, because these were the traders in between. Contrary to endonyms, exonyms do not mark a community's territory, features in its possession or responsibility, but indicate a community's pattern of historical and current cultural, economic, and political external relations. However, since I have to say the caveat, so to say, with some distortions caused by the acquaintance of receiver language speakers with prestigious trade languages. For instance, it is not as necessary to maintain exonyms for the English, for the Anglophone sphere or for the Francophone sphere, because it's usually important trade languages in our countries, in German-speaking countries, for instance, also in Poland. So it is not as necessary to create or to maintain exonyms for these languages, for features in the sphere of these languages. Also, linguistic relations between donor and receiver language play a certain role in their ambivalence. They rather can enforce, they can rather prompt exonyms, prompt creating exonyms or using exonyms, or it can also be the opposite. It can, however, not be denied that sometimes the use of exonyms is understood as a territorial claim, or at least political nostalgia, by receiver as well as donor language speakers. This makes them politically sensitive, and is certainly a still valid reason for ungagging exonyms skepticism mentioned before. The danger of understanding them in this way is highest with exonyms that had earlier been endonyms and have lost this status due to population exchange. It is thus true that exonym use requires cultural and political sensitivity. When we speak of human communities, the question arises, who is this local community? The community that has the endonym for features on its territory. Who is really this community? Of course, a place can also be shared by communities, by a local majority and a local minority or several minorities. And in this case, every local community may have its own endonym for this place, and the place may have a couple of endonyms in this way. Most of us, and actually I think all of us, are also not only belonging or feeling to belong to one community, but to several communities. We have multiple identities. When human communities are understood not as coherence groups or as groups which meet every day on a daily basis, so to say, but as identity groups in the sociological sense, in the sense of groups of people sharing a common identity, not knowing each other, but just sharing a common identity. A multi-layered hierarchy of communities exists, and one and the same person may very well identify himself as belonging to several of these layers, have multiple space-related identities. We can feel to belong to our settlement, to our city, our town, our village. We can feel to belong to our commune, municipality, to our region. We can feel to be citizens of the country, a citizen of the country, members of a nation, member of a language community like the English, for instance, member of the European Union, we can feel European, we can feel even as global citizens. And most of these levels are well organized, are active in naming and place name standardization, and apply their endonyms to geographical features within their area and range of responsibility. This means, for instance, that the name for the Earth is an endonym with all languages on Earth, as we are, because we are all Earthlings. We are all living on Earth, therefore, in all languages and spoken on Earth, the word Earth, the name Earth, is an endonym. It's a relevant name in the relevant language. The name of any feature on Earth, however, is only an endonym of the community inhabiting it or residing nearest to it, as mentioned before. The endonym-exonym divide escapes the criteria of language and officiality. Language and officiality are no criteria for the endonym-exonym divide. The divide exists also within a language. A geographical feature, a mountain, for instance, can look very different from both sides, from both valleys, for instance. From the one valley, it has steep rock faces. From the other valley, it's smooth. It has wood and alpine pastures only. So it can be named differently by speakers of the same language. And then the endonym is the name of the one group, is the endonym on the one side, and becomes an exonym at the other side of the mountain. And this refers also to populated places. Inhabitants of a populated place sometimes call their place differently from outsiders. And in Transylvania, for instance, the river Mureș is called by the German-speaking Saxons on the upper run of river Mureș, Mireș, while the also German-speaking Bernard Swabians are calling it Maros, orthographic adaptation of the Hungarian name to the German language. So speakers of the same German language there call this same river differently. And the Bernard Swabian name for the upper run of the river is an exonym, and the local name, the name Mireș, as it is used by the local Saxons, is an endonym. And then we have also names in non-local languages that can have endonym status. An Italian restaurant, for instance, in a non-Italian speaking surrounding can have an Italian name given by the owner, and it can be used also locally in the surrounding of this restaurant, of course. Then it is an endonym because it is the name of the person and of the community, of the small community owning this restaurant. There are also numerous English commercial names in non-English speaking countries. They have been chosen, are used and accepted by the local community, though they are endonyms. Then an official name is not eo ipso an endonym. There are official names imposed by an authority and not accepted and used by the local community in its internal communication. Very likely, however, in communication between the local community and this authority. The official German name Litzmannstadt, for instance, imposed by the Nazi occupation forces on the Polish city of Łódź, was not an endonym because it was not accepted by the local community and not used in their internal communication. Even the German population, partly a German population of Łódź at that time, which still existed after the Second World War, did not use Litzmannstadt, they used Łódź, the orthographic adaptation of the Polish name to the German language. The Italian names imposed by the fascist Mussolini regime on the German-speaking South Tyrol were at least at the beginning exonyms, because they were not used by the local German-speaking population. Later on, they became endonyms, of course. So today, already the fourth and fifth generation of Italians is living there, even in small places of South Tyrol. And the Italian names are their names, even if they have been artificially created, translated from German names and so on. But now these are the names relating these Italian speakers, these local Italian speakers, this local community with their place. Therefore, they have become endonyms after some generations. Earlier, they have been exonyms. Then the endonym-exonym divide covers all place names. There's no place name escaping it. Every place name is either an endonym or an exonym or both, but it can only be here an endonym and there it is an exonym. So not at the same place, it cannot be at the same place, exonym and endonym at the same time. In a certain place, however, a place name can only belong to one of these categories, of the two categories. In the case of transboundary features, features and geographical features crossing community boundaries, such as longer rivers or mountain ranges, the same name can be an endonym in one section of the feature and assume exonym status in another section of it, while it always denotes the whole feature. The name, of course, denotes always the whole feature. So this, let me exemplify you that by the example of Donau. Donau is a German name for the Danube. Donau is a German name, of course, stands for the whole river from the sources, source rivers up to the mouth into the Black Sea. But it is an endonym only in the German-speaking parts, along the German-speaking section of the river. So up in Germany and in Austria, up to the Slovakian border. Then the same name, Donau, turns into an exonym. And other names have the status of endonyms. So Dunaj in Slovakia, Dunaj in Hungary, Dunav in Croatia, Serbia, and Bulgaria, and Dunavia in Romania and Moldova, and Dunaj again in Ukraine. So the same name can have endonym and exonym status, but never at the same place. So in one place it is an endonym, in the other place it becomes an exonym. But it always denotes the whole feature, of course. Also, Donau denotes the Danube in Romania or in Bulgaria. Then the concept of the endonym-exonym divide is transferable to other name categories. It can, and therefore I think a basic onomastic concept. It can in principle be transferred to names of all types of features to which an inside and an outside view applies, such as the names of persons. There we have frequently the self-designation, the name from within, the self-designation would be the endonym, of course, and not always flattering nickname. The name used by others is the exonym. When I was a schoolboy, I was, of course, I called myself Peter, of course, but by my friends and my colleagues, I was called Condor because of my nose, perhaps. Then ethnic groups, nations are also relevant in this context. Dignified self-descriptions in endonyms, which often mean simply people or humans, and they often are contrasted by ironic or pejorative external names, which are exonyms. Then institutions, organizations can have endonyms and exonyms. The endonym police, for instance, is frequently contrasted by various ironic and derogatory exonyms. So let me now turn to my second part, divergent approaches to the endonym-exonym divide. It is a contested concept, as I said. There exist, however, divergent views on this divide. The main difference is regarding endonyms and exonyms as the two extreme ends of a continuum with a gradual transition between them, and the second view, understanding the two as a clear dichotomy, or perhaps I should better say opposition, the clear opposition between the two. So let me first turn to the continuum view. it acknowledges all efforts of a receiver language to remain as close as possible to the endonym and the endoform, and would not classify efforts into this direction as creating full-fledged exonyms. It recognizes, for instance, 4 transitional steps. First is, here's the endonym. I have represented this by a sliding scales, by sliding colors. They're sliding from red to blue, from endonym to exonym. And the 4th deviation from the real endonym is by orthographic deviation, by diacritics, exchange of individual letters, and so on. So, for instance, if the Romanian name Kimpolung, which is written in this way in Romanian, is in Croatian written Kimpolung with a K and with an I, it expresses just the intention to remain with the endonym as close as possible. If a Croatian would pronounce if a Croatian would pronounce try to pronounce the Romanian name in the original spelling, it would end up in Sampolung, not in Kimpolung. So the orthographic adaptation is, displays its intention to remain with the endonym as close as possible. Then a second step is the addition of a vowel of a grammatical ending. Italians have the phonodactics, the habit to not to end a name or a word in general with a consonant. They like to have a vowel added. So they add to Bern, to the German endonym Bern in Switzerland, for the city in Switzerland, and an A which leads to Berna. Then a third step would be script conversion. So if by transliteration, conversion litera per litera from the Cyrillic script, for instance, into the Roman script, a name is just transliterated, it is still, this is still expressing the intention to remain with the endonym as close as possible, so to say. So it results, of course, in a completely different picture, but it is the intention to remain with the endonym as much as possible. Then the 4th step of deviation from the endonym into the direction of the exonym would be translation of the generic. If, for instance, Cape Agulhas, Kulhas, in South Africa, is English generic is translated into German into Cap Agulhas, then it would be this example for this. And of course, a full-fledged exonym is Vienna. It is here. It is obvious that the intention was to create an exonym, a new name, so to say. Peter Bell, the linguist from Estonia, and other linguists would thus regard endonyms and exonyms not as strictly opposed, but as the two ends of a gradual transition in which exonymity gains at the expense of endonymity. And he proposes 4 terms: endonyms, true endonyms, so to say, which is the word Moskva in the Cyrillic version, then endonymoids obtained by conversion of scripts, so transliterated into Roman script, Moskva, or adapting name endings, like as we have seen earlier, Berna, or here Stockholmer, then full-fledged exonyms, Moscow, for instance, and exonymoids obtained by translation of generic terms, omission or alteration of diacritical marks, declension or deviation. This is a continuum view. Now let me turn to the dichotomy view or opposition view. This view is corresponding to a cultural geographical perspective. It regards only names as endonyms which are completely conforming to local use and accepted in this form by the locals. It departs from the assumption that the local community will perceive even the slightest deviation from their name in spelling as alienating it, as creating a name version used by others, not by themselves, thus as an exonym. So even the slightest deviation from the endonym, here expressed as you can see here, Riga in the original version is with a line on the E, and if this line is exchanged against a dot on the I, this is already creating an exonym because it does not correspond to the local name. Local would not perceive it as his or her name. The same is true for Istanbul. If the dot on the I, which is the Turkish endonym version, would be exchanged to a normal capital I, as it is in German or in English, for instance. And of course, Berna is already an exonym, even if only an A is added. Moskva is an exonym because it is also it is transliterated, but a local would not recognize it as her or his name. And Vienna is, of course, an exonym. So these are examples for the dichotomy version. And just as a striking example, imagine a Krakowian inhabitant of Krakow looking at this town sign here. Would he recognize this name as his name, as his or her name? It is just the transliteration of the Roman name version into the Cyrillic name version, but it is not anymore the local name. It is, I think, not recognizable for local people as their name. They would not recognize it as their name. It would, on this background, also be difficult to argue with why a minority name deviating from the name in the majority language only by their critic has to appear additionally on a down sign for identity reasons when a name alienated by their critics or even transcribed counts as an endonym. Now, my third part, definitions. The following definitions of endonym and exonym conform to both approaches, but mainly because they are so unspecific. Let me first present you our working group on exonyms definition. This working group was created in 2002 and discussed the endonym exonym divide really extensively, and they arrived at these two definitions of the endonym and of the exonym. However, they were not approved later by the General Assembly, so to say, of Angegen, due to a political veto. Angegen is not only a scientific body, it is also a political body, and it's always so that political affairs play a certain role. But inside the working group, we were almost unanimously in favor of these two definitions, and they run as follows. As you can see, the endonym is the name used and accepted. This is very important. It has to be accepted, not only be used, but also fully accepted by the local community. Then the exonym is a name not used and accepted by the local community and differing from the endonym. Then the Angegen glossary definitions of 2007, which are still the relevant United Nations definitions, because our working group definitions have finally not been accepted. And the endonym is defined here in this way. Endonym is a name of a geographical feature in an official or well-established language occurring in that area where the feature is situated. And then some examples are given. Exonym is a name used in a specific language for a geographical feature situated outside the area where that language is widely spoken and differing in its form from the respective endonyms in the area endonym or endonyms, if minorities exist, where their geographical feature is situated. And again, examples are given here. So contrary to our working group definitions, these definitions regard names in official languages eo ipso as endonyms. So if a name is official, it is anyway an endonym, and exclude an endonym-exonym divide within a language. They also recognize transliterated names as endonyms if they are transliterated according to the angegeben transliteration systems recommended by angegeben. Not explicitly mentioned in these definitions, but defined by United Nations resolution are names differing from the endonym only by the omission, addition, or alteration of diacritics or the article, by declination or derivation, or created by the translation of a generic term. They are regarded as exonyms by the United Nations, which brings these definitions closer to the dichotomy than to the continuum approach. Then the ICOS definitions, this is from the ICOS list of key onomastic terms. It presents the following definitions. Endonym is a proper name of a geographical feature in an official or well-established language occurring in that area where the feature is situated. And examples are given. Exonym is the name used in a specific language for a geographical feature situated outside the area where that language is widely spoken and differing in its form from the name used in the area where the geographical feature is situated. They repeat, as you can see, more or less the definitions of the Angegeben Glossary 2007 with slight variations. They are not accepting an intra-language divide, and regarding official, yes, they are not like the Angegeben definitions, they are not accepting an intra-language divide. And regarding official names, eo ipso as endonyms, like the Angegeben definitions do. Contrary to the Angegeben definitions, however, they do not explicitly classify transliterated names as endonyms. Characteristically enough, none of the definitions defines whether the divide is based on the written or the spoken name. Confining the divide to the written form would mean to exclude the spoken divide arising in East Asian writing systems like kanji, while the written form is the same. Excluding, explicitly including the spoken name, while in practice the endonym-exonym divide apart from the sinosphere refers to the written form, would on the other hand mean a huge increase in the number of exonyms, since hardly any endonym is pronounced correctly outside the endonym community. And it would also be very difficult to draw a line between what is an endonym by pronunciation and an exonym. The task of combining the two practices in the same definitions remains still to be resolved. So let me turn to my conclusions. Coinciding with basic human attitudes, such as discerning between mine and yours, ours and theirs, as well as human territoriality, the endonym-exonym divide is certainly a crucial scientific concept. Two divergent approaches, however, make it difficult to arrive at definitions of endonym and exonym that are all inclusive and precise at the same time. While the linguistic approach regards the divide rather as a continuum with several transitional stages closer to the endonym or the exonym, the cultural geographical approach accepts the spatial relation between name user and the feature that is designated by the name as an exclusive criterion. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.